through. The first one, identify the risk. The second one, what are the BIM uses out of all of the different BIM uses that are available that would attack those risks? And then once we've identified when we are going to execute, when we need that by, we can identify what the key scope areas are for that. We're in Tyler Johnson's account, and Tyler has already created a project. It's an office project that we can dig into the plan and understand where this project is and what he's working on. Inside of the project information, we can see the details about the project. We can add team members, but the key for this workflow was to identify project risks.
So we're going to demo those 3 steps.
We're going to demo those 3 steps. So step 1, let's go to see this section where we've started to list from the brainstorming session what project risks our owner is really interested in. And we can then go through those risks and start to prioritize them. Quite simply, in a risk register, we can label them, we can start to put data behind this, we can crunch the numbers if we wanted to, but quite simply in this instance, our owner is interested in, Louis is going to pretend to be the owner here.
I'll pretend to be the owner and say that we have a very complex design on this project.
And that's a big concern of yours.
Yes.
Maybe you've had change orders in the past or something that's been really impacting the project because of poor coordination, because of design requirements. And the other part that you might be interested in, I know this because I've had this conversation a couple of times with Louis already. So asset information, that's a challenge for you, and the potential for running some kind of maintenance. So we can go through this, we can start to label and define exactly what we're going to do, what we're saying is going to be the primary set of risks. We can then define when they are going to occur in the design phase and have a very informed conversation, recording that into the plan. And then in here, we've got also commenting. So there might be comments, there might be an approval process. So if we approve this section so that the team understands that this is now approved and it's something that we are going to take on to the next step.
So how can we reduce these risks on my project, Brian?
Funny you asked. So that would move on to then the BIM uses. So once we've defined what are the primary concerns for our owner as far as the risk goes on their project, we can then identify those BIM uses that we're going to implement. So in the examples where we said maybe there's a constraint on the site, maybe a BIM use of 4D scheduling for a specific phase of the project would be useful. If there's really specific budget concerns, then using quantities at a certain milestone to get more surety on the outturn on the cost based on those quantities. So if we go into the scoping, we have some milestones in here already for some of the design phases, but what we are going to also want is another milestone at the end of here, and we'll call this the FM handover. And we could choose dates, and now this appears as another column, a milestone, a stage, a phase, a deliverable, a BIM use, whatever you call them, and however you want to slice them through that time span is completely up to you and very flexible.
So this is the 3rd step you mentioned.
The 3rd step is linking what the scope is required for the required BIM use and to mitigate the right risks. We could add from a template, we could add from a previous project, but let's create something from scratch with the owner in the room. So for our coordination milestone, let's say that we have building 1 scope that we're going to talk about. So what is important for our owner for coordination? Maybe it's because it's a steel structure, and we would bring in some of the ceilings and
systems, plumbing, HVAC. We can continue on electrical data.
So it really is a case of what is important and what do we need inside of this system. So I'm going to bring in a few of these and say save. And what it provides us is a grid that shows now the scope that we've discussed down the left-hand side, the milestones and the BIM uses in a time axis along the top. And now we can go about, at this point in time, adding our requirements. We could simply add by clicking. So we're going to choose based on the owner's discussion, based on our requirements, based on a team and in a discussion about what's really required. We're not going to click into every cell individually and increment. We have tools to be able to assist us and make this a lot quicker.
And you can just see that it's a very visual tool that helps me as an owner not be educated with, you know, LOD standards. So the visual images that we're going to show right now really help understand for everyone on the project.
Yep. I'm just going to assign some of these. So we can use the team assignment. We can use the LOD assignment to quickly assign things. Maybe the architect is responsible for ceilings here, and then maybe we've got mechanical engineer to put these in here. So the point there is to say really quick to create the grid of when it's going to occur, what the BIM use is, what the items from a system level are. But then what's really important at this stage is to say what we do and what we do not need to do. From a coordination perspective, an earlier phase, it may be important to just include certain elements.
Right. So how can we communicate that with our consultants? What elements we need to be modeled? How can we get there quicker, leaner, right, without having all the waste?
And so we start to talk about what's required. So yes, we need columns. Yes, we need beams. Yes, we need framing. Yes, we need the trusses. It depends on how far along we are looking at coordination. It was an early phase coordination before construction documentation. So maybe we're not looking for the sag rods or the base plates necessarily, or the connections or the welds. You know, we would go through each of these and start to define exactly what we're looking at, what we need, and we can do that by opening each of these, or we can do it by opening the fourth level, which is the element level, and we can simply, so if we want the metal decking, this has been a very visual way of sitting in a meeting and saying, I do want the metal decking, so that you can add that and you can see it here in the screen at the top.
Maybe doing it for the plumbing scope would be good.
Let's do that. So plumbing scope, we can see here, water distribution, yes, we want the tanks, want those areas. Do we want clearances?
Yeah, some of our customers requested the content, so such as clearances, zones, specifically for coordination purposes or early concept, just trying to get an idea of where those zones are before having to model a detailed plumbing system.
Right, so if we want, for example, here, we're going to add the fixtures, and we're going to add some of the elements with their clearances, but we're not going to add all of the risers, the piping, for example, here, when you can see these turn on. It's small on this screen, we can blow it up just to be able to give you an idea. But it's really that discussion about how we're going to model, what we're going to model, what we're not going to model too early, so that we can make sure that we get.
We have a really good question here. So as you add and remove the content, does it change the LOD score?
That's a great question. So what we found being pretty interesting as we travel around the world was that LOD is a combination of multiple different things. Actually, we've got other webinars about this, but about 6 different very what needed to be flexible aspects were crammed into one number. And that included whether we were going to or not going to model a specific element. And an example where rebar, maybe you're wanting to do fabrication level concrete, but you don't want to model the rebar. However, at a fixed number, you had to decide whether it was or not included. People wanted the flexibility to be able to change that. So that's what we have seen be a really in high demand. So being able to turn these on and off does not inflict on the level of detail, level of development, level of definition that you're choosing here. If you have chosen a specific combination of the geometry and the maturity or the reliability that matches in the standard that you are using, then it will show you the number. But if you choose something alternate, so maybe we're looking at fabrication level, which the geometry does obviously update to be able to show you something differently. But now this is a special condition because no standard, or the standard that we've chosen, does not have this combination of fabrication level with at just a proposed. Why would you go to? I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
This is where we've seen a lot of that waste, where modeling too many elements and information that just wasn't important to anyone or not being used by anyone.
And so the example here actually is we're following the BIM forum standard. So if we move from proposed to coordinated, you'll see this changes to the 350, the recognized combination for actually coordinated geometry. And it's very interesting, and we can unpack that discussion in a lot more detail. It's been a fun one to have and to solve that challenge.
We have another question here about information.
Information as in, oh, just adding information?
Yeah, adding information.
Well, let's talk about the handover now then, and we can talk about adding information.
Add a handover.
For handover, yeah. Here we've defined that their cooling systems are required with their clearances for coordination. But for handover, what do we actually need? Mm-hmm. So let's define the elements first, and I can show adding the information.
Right, so maybe for my case, I just need the equipment. I don't need to information for ducting or any other information.
So maybe, yeah, the handover is just these pieces of equipment.
Yes.
And now that we've selected them, the image updates. Maybe we don't need fabrication level. Maybe we're okay with just generic representation. We would like them to be as built, accurate, but we're not going to ask for millimeter accuracy. We're going to say and use the LOA scale, the level of accuracy scale. We're going to assign this to a team, probably the contractor, to provide this, and we're going to then add information requirements for these elements. This is a very detailed way of doing it by adding them to each element individually. We also have the mass assignment option.
I just care about warranty.
I almost predicted that. It's like the third time that we've done, what do we want though? There's so many of them.
Start date.
Do you want the IFC version of them?
Yeah.
Start date, end date, maybe that's, and and the point of contact as well, if we want the point of contact. 3 items we discussed with the owner, and we now add those pieces of information required. That becomes part of the data that we can then report on. So this is a special condition. We've chosen generic geometry, we've chosen as-built level of maturity, and we've added the information required. And now you might want to create some kind of contract to get this out and share this with other people. And so we go to the PDF and, okay, so this is going to be, let's say that this is the handover requirements, and we're going to create a detailed version of the scope, and we're just going to choose the handover. Actually, let's add the coordination as well. I'm just going to call this a contract. So it's got more than that in. We can add headers and footers, etc. But let's print that so that we've got a contract that we can then share with others. If you have questions, please add them as we move through. We've been answering some of them, but I can see a few of them that maybe we'll have time for. Each of the requirements within our milestones. But for the FM handover, we can see now the list of items here, the IFC parameters that we're requiring, what the elements are that we need it to be within a certain tolerance on an as-built scale as well. BIM is not the solution. You can't just say, I would like some BIM on my project and then expect magical results. What we are saying is if you can plan that workflow from a defined risk first, match your BIM uses to those risks, pick only a few risks, don't go crazy, and then using a grid like the scoping grid visually is a very appealing thing for the owners. We've found that to be very, very useful, and suddenly they are much more aware of what BIM can do and what BIM is. And using that grid, we can then define exactly what elements we need in order to achieve the BIM use at that milestone.